I participated in an official tug-of-war contest once in my life. And I have to admit, I never ever really saw the point of the game, and an official contest did not change my mind in the least. Tug-of-war involves two teams holding on to the different ends of the rope and then pulling against each other with all of their might. One side wins when the flag in the middle crosses some arbitrary line that says they can pull harder. Besides straining to move the rope without any measurable success, all I remember from that day is the aches and pains that hit the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, and for about 2 weeks. And I remember thinking, who thought tug-of-war was fun? Because for me, that game was so not worth it. Even so, we play tug-of-war with issues and people more than most of us grab a rope and play that game. People, politicians, and each side of an argument will grab hold of an issue and pull back and forth until one side musters the strength to pull an issue off-center just enough to say they won. And unfortunately, both sides of the issue are left with the aches and pains that pop up in unexpected places. And even though one side claims victory, the other side never really does let go of the issue. Ill will continues even though the issue has supposedly been resolved. Well, the Gospel of Mark was based on the idea of a cosmic struggle between good and evil. God represented good, Satan represented evil. Humankind was the rope that was being pulled back and forth between good and evil. Now, Mark believed that human beings were being pulled back and forth between God and evil. And Mark wrote with a sense of urgency because he believed that the end of time was coming soon. The Roman legion was invading and was in the process of destroying Israel as they waged war against the freedom fighters. Jesus had been resurrected to start the kingdom of God. So between the Roman legion and Jesus' resurrection, Mark thought, we got to get ready because the end is coming any time now. And he wanted people to choose which side of the rope, God or evil, they would hold on to. The story of temptation of Jesus in Mark's gospel was a story of a cosmic tug-of-war. It's told in only 2 verses compared to all the other gospels, but it speaks volumes because Jesus was the rope being pulled between God and evil, and the battle took place in the wilderness. For the wilderness in the Bible represents a place that is absent of God. The wilderness was a place where forces hostile to God lived. The wilderness was the place where humankind faced a test, and the wilderness forced people to choose which side they would hold on to in life. When tested in the wilderness, where God was not particularly welcome, the question was, would humans hold on to God, or would they hold on to the forces of evil found in the wilderness? Now, most of us have spent time in the wilderness. Some of us wandered in there deliberately because, after all, life in the shadows seemed pretty fun and pretty exciting. Because sometimes walking close to God, always doing the right thing, always avoiding temptations, well, sometimes it seemed boring, and the wilderness was exciting. The people in the places seemed so edgy, and we didn't want to miss out on anything. We didn't want to miss out on the fun. So we wandered into the wilderness to see what was going on. You never know, it might have been great. Some of us detoured into the wilderness by accident. We thought we were listening to God. We thought we were on the right path. But we ended up listening to a voice, a different voice that caught our ear. And we followed that voice along until we ended up smack dab in the middle of the wilderness. And some of us find ourselves in the wilderness to be tested. In the midst of temptation, in the midst of all of those things that offered us so much, in the midst of being lured by evil to the dark side. And yes, that was a deliberate reference to Star Wars. Did we have the strength to trust God and hold on to God's hand, or would we go over to the dark side? In wilderness, we are the rope. And regardless of how we get there, God is holding on to one hand, pulling us back toward God, and evil is holding on to the other hand and pulling us toward the dark side. Well, Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness in Mark's gospel. All 40 days he was being tested by God. Because Mark's Jesus was quite human. Mark, more than any of the other gospels, knew how easy it was for the human side of Jesus to succumb to temptation. So Mark's temptation of Jesus made him the rope in that cosmic tug of war between God and evil. And if God won, if Jesus held on to God's hand, then he would continue his path to be the Messiah, God in flesh and blood. If evil won, Jesus would have never been the Messiah. Jesus would have never hung on a cross. He would have never been resurrected. So Mark put Jesus into the wilderness where he was tested for 40 days and 40 nights. The season of Lent reminds us how very strong evil is in our lives and in our world. Lent reminds us that there are times when we all wander into the wilderness, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by accident. But Lent reminds us that every time we wander into the wilderness, a cosmic tug of war for our souls takes place. Now, fortunately, we're not alone in the struggle. Mark said that in addition to God and evil, there were wild beasts and there were angels. And the wild beasts were agents of evil, whereas the angels were agents of God. And even though Jesus was tugged between God and evil for 40 days, God was present in the angels offering help, hope, and encouragement. Now, I suspect we all end up in the wilderness far more often than we would like. Jesus was back in the wilderness more often than most scholars are willing to admit. He was in the wilderness every time his followers frustrated him. Remember how often Jesus would say, "How long must I live amongst you hard-headed people? How long will you be so absolutely stupid? How long will you lack faith?" Jesus got frustrated a lot with his followers. And Jesus, he was in the wilderness in the Garden of Gethsemane. Remember how he prayed, "Let this cup pass from me." Jesus didn't want to go to the cross. Who would? It was a horrible, horrible experience. And he asked for God to let him out of it. And then Jesus was on the cross and in the wilderness again when he said, "God, why have you forsaken me?" The temptation for Jesus to leave the cross, to walk away from all of it, to say, "I don't really need any of this," to walk away from those who wanted him dead, was always present and always powerful. And we all end up in the wilderness sometimes, wondering why we are trying so hard to live Jesus' way, when so often it seems so much easier and so much more lucrative to turn to evil. We all end up in the wilderness when we listen to the voices of evil whispering temptations in our souls. We all end up in the wilderness when we listen to voices other than God's voice. We all end up in the wilderness every time God asks us to take the next step in faith, for evil will always try to hold us back from growing closer to God. We all end up in the wilderness, and when that happens, we are the rope being pulled backwards and forwards between God and evil. And all we have to do is let go of one side of the rope. If we choose to hold on to evil, we will travel deeper into the wilderness and farther away from God. If we hold on to evil, we will go into darker and darker places where we find our soul being destroyed little by little. If we hold on to evil, we will find more and more trouble until the day we realize that evil's goal is to destroy us. Tug of war is a game that nobody really wins until we decide to let go of the rope. When we are the rope in the wilderness, our only option is to let go of one side, to let go of either God or evil. And the sooner we let go of evil, the sooner we get to leave the wilderness. The sooner we get to let go of the pain and the despair and the darkness that comes from living in the wilderness. The sooner we let go of evil, the sooner we start to grow closer to God, experience the joy and the peace and the hope that comes with growing closer to God. Because holding on to God is the only way to win that cosmic tug of war. Amen.
Amen.